morning, Chairman Miller, Ranking Member McEwen, and members of the committee. My name is David Uhlmann, and I'm a professor at the University of Michigan Law School. I previously served for 17 years as a federal prosecutor, the last 7 as the chief of the Environmental Crime Section of the Justice Department. Every day in our great country, 15 people go to work and never come home again. Hundreds more go to work healthy and come home severely injured. While some deaths and injuries cannot be avoided, far too many occur because of worker safety violations. We can do better in the United States of America. We can spend hours debating about whether the costs of regulatory compliance are too high or about whether our worker safety laws are too complex. But that debate will not bring comfort to Becky Foster and her family, or to the thousands of families who've lost loved ones because of worker safety violations. More debate also will not change one simple fact. The problem with our worker safety laws is not the rules. The problem is that there are no consequences for breaking the rules. Today in the United States of America, it's only a 6-month misdemeanor if you commit a willful violation of the worker safety laws and a worker dies. Now, if the same employer who commits that violation goes out over the weekend and shoots a deer without a state permit and transports that deer across state lines, it's a 5-year felony. Surely the sanction for committing a willful violation of the law that results in a worker death should be at least as great as the sanction for killing a deer. The weak penalties for violations that result in worker deaths are not the only problem with the current version of the Occupational Safety and Health Act. I'd like to tell you just briefly about one of the cases that I prosecuted at the Justice Department, which I think highlights the problems with the worker safety laws. It involved an employer named Alan Elias, a company called Evergreen Resources in Soda Springs, Idaho. And Alan Elias was one of the most notorious violators of environmental health and safety laws in the state of Idaho. His facilities had been inspected for years. He'd received penalties for years. But none of that stopped him from sending his workers on a hot summer day in August of 1996 into a tank of cyanide waste, a confined space just like the type that Mr. Halpern testified about just a few moments ago. He provided no safety equipment for those workers. He did no testing of the air inside the tank. And a 20-year-old young man named Scott Dominguez, in his first job out of high school, collapsed inside the tank, suffered severe and permanent brain damage. And to tell you everything you need to know about that defendant, that employer, when firefighters were there responding to this worker injury, trying to save Mr. Dominguez's life, they asked Mr. Elias what was inside the tank. And he told them, even though he'd put cyanide in that tank, he told them there was nothing in the tank that could hurt anyone. When the emergency room doctors called him, desperately trying to save Scott Dominguez's life, and asked Mr. Elias, was there any possibility that there was cyanide in the tank? Mr. Elias lied and said no. Now, we were able to prosecute Mr. Elias under the environmental laws, and after a 3.5-week trial, he was convicted and sentenced to 17 years in prison, which until recently was the longest sentence ever imposed for environmental crime. But Mr. Elias did not commit a criminal violation of the Occupational Safety and Health Act. He didn't commit a criminal violation even though he may have committed 15 violations of the Confined Space Entry Program, and even though OSHA did cite him for willful violations of the OSHA Act. He didn't commit a criminal violation even though a jury unanimously found beyond a reasonable doubt that he had knowingly exposed his workers to imminent danger of death or serious bodily injury. He didn't commit a violation of the Occupational Safety and Health Act because the doctors were able to save Scott Dominguez's life. There's something wrong with the law when an employer who knowingly endangers his workers commits a 17-year felony under the environmental laws, but doesn't even commit a crime under the law designed to protect the health and safety of America's workers. We began a worker endangerment initiative at the Justice Department based on the Elias case and others like it to target companies that were serial violators of the environmental laws and the health and safety laws. That initiative has continued in the last 2 years since I left the department and has enjoyed many successes, including the sentencings last week in the prosecution of the McQuain's division, Atlantic States in New Jersey. Four corporate officials were sentenced to jail terms in that case. The company was sentenced to pay an $8 million fine. But the success of the Worker Endangerment Initiative owes more to the strength of the environmental laws and the creativity of prosecutors than it does to the OSHA Act. Like prosecuting Al Capone for taxes, prosecutors charge worker endangerment in cases like Atlantic States under Title 18 of the United States Code, under the environmental laws. Moreover, the success of the Worker Endangerment Initiative only addresses a fraction of the worker safety problem because according to the most recent Department of Labor data, only 9% of worker fatalities occur because of environmental hazards. It's time to bring the OSHA Act into the 21st century by enacting meaningful penalties for criminal violations of the Act. I've detailed in my written testimony the ways the Act can be strengthened. Many of those changes are included in the Protecting America's Workers Act introduced last week by Congresswoman Woolsey. And I would urge the enactment of that law, and I'd be pleased to work with Congressman Woolsey and other members of the committee about ways to strengthen the law. On this Workers' Memorial Day, we cannot provide justice for those whose lives have been lost because of worker safety violations, but we can honor their memories. Everyone deserves a safe place to work and the ability to come home to their families in good health at night. By passing the Protecting America's Workers Act, you can make good on the promise of a safe workplace made nearly 40 years ago when Congress enacted the Occupational Safety and Health Act. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today.